Well, hello. I have a licensee that I cannot wait to introduce to you. Her name is Louise. Louise, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I would like to take this time so the audience can get to know you. And I can't wait to get to our question about Italy. Louise just returned from Italy, I think earlier this summer, and I want her to share some of her experiences with us. But first, let's talk about how do you think learning manners will help students today?
Well, one of the big things that I emphasize is the confidence. I think that the kids appear much more confident, and even if they don't necessarily feel confident inside, they make their presence, they portray as more confident, self-confident, self-assured. And the reason I emphasize that is because I also think it makes them more memorable and in a positive way. And I think it's good to be memorable. And when you're in a crowded room with many, many children the same age, the ones that usually stand out, it's for something, some quality that they have, be it confidence or otherwise. And I think to be memorable for something positive is always good. So,
Yes, I agree. That is a great point about confidence. We do become memorable, whether it's for a child or for an adult. Memorable. Yes, I like to put those two together. And then with confidence, really, it's the foundation for many things when as we're going into our adulthood. And I do believe confidence also continues to grow at every age.
yes, definitely, definitely. Who
What
you
is
are at 11 is a lot.
Yes. So what inspired you to start a business teaching manners to children?
Well, one of the things was COVID. I have an 11-year-old daughter, and the 2 years of COVID, her world became very, very small because she's an only child. So it was just myself, my husband, and her. And I think that, when you're kind of hunkered down for so long, you sort of lose that social skills. She kind of had to be reintroduced to talking to people outside of her nuclear family. So that was one of the things. And then the second thing was we actually, because we were overseas living in Rome at the time, although COVID, the same lockdown restrictions, when we did come out of lockdown, I noticed a difference with the children overseas versus the kids in the U.S. In terms of the socialization, how they came out of COVID. They had a little more interaction because of extended families, and
Yeah.
they logistically live. Unlike I say in the USA, we live all over in different states. In Rome, families still very much live within a block of each other, extended families. So even though we were in lockdown during COVID, they were still interacting with their extended family.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wow. Neat that you noticed that. I can see that. I can see that for sure. And also, that leads to the next question. During your training, we had some conversations about Italy, specifically around lunchtime. And I found that
yeah,
fascinating and would like to learn more. And I think my audience would get a lot of value from our discussion around lunchtime and how it's different in Italy, because your daughter attended school there in
she did.
Italy.
She did. Yes, she did. So we lived in a neighborhood called Trastevere, which is a very old neighborhood. It's part of the city of Rome, but it's actually separated by the Tiber River. So we lived on the Vatican side.
Mhm.
Very traditional neighborhood. So there are no school buses. So the children walk to school, and there's two elementary schools, and it really comes down to where your apartment is located. That's how they decide whichever one's closest is the one you go to. So every day at 11:30, the children are released from school, and the furthest walk I think was like 10 minutes to get home, but they actually go home for lunch every day. So they leave school at 11:30, and they are expected to return at 1. And the children will, they go home, they'll sit down, they'll eat lunch, their mother will be there. They may have a friend with them, they may have a grandparent, they may have their parents there. at noontime, the smaller shops in Rome, all over the city, close. They take a 2-hour lunch break. Mm-hmm. So everybody knows we cannot do anything between 12 and 2 as far as any type of shopping. You can go out to eat, and all the cafes are full. But I guess the thing I liked the most about it was it had a break in the middle of the day where she got to come home. She got to sit down. We sat at the table. We talked about what she had done in the morning. We, as far as eating goes, because she had that hour and a half, it was not a formal meal, but it was a healthier meal, mm-hmm. Where she was sitting at the table, eating off a plate, not out of a paper bag. And I found that she was more relaxed. The meal was more of a social event. I think that, when we came back to the U.S. and she went back to school, the first thing she said when she came home from school was, they give us 20 minutes for lunch. And I said, oh my gosh, 20 minutes for lunch. How are you going to eat in 20 minutes? 20 we were talking about that. Like, no, you go to lunch, you have 20 minutes, you eat this, you eat this, you eat this. If you're not done, you put it back in the stack and you get to the next thing. So that was one of the really, huge differences that I saw, was that the kids were, I think the family style meal, they had, breakfast with the family, you have lunch with the family, and you have dinner with the family, the 3 meals. So kids are very used to that. And they don't have phones or anything at the table. Where I saw a lot, especially here in the United States, the restaurants, the parents give the kids phones and the kids are playing on phones. That was that was not, it just wasn't, it wasn't to say that the children don't have phones, but the table was really considered sort of a sacred space, I think. Mm-hmm. Certainly if you were a guest in somebody's house, they would take great offense if you rushed through your meal, if you pulled out your phone. They really value food over there. It's sort of a way of expressing, their friendship and their love. They have a real passion for it, not only, in presenting it, but in feeding people. If you're a guest in their home, you're treated, like royalty. And I just think that the etiquette was very, very different over there. You did not see the things that certainly we see here. And I know the difference, and we talked about the differences of dining styles, but it went further than that. It also went with the attitudes. And I think that, just the pace of life was much more, there was no excuse for rushing through a meal. There was no excuse. And I mean, to the point that if she didn't get back to school at 1:00, if we were eating somewhere, it was a forgivable offense, where I was like, we better get moving. Because I'm so used to being the schedule of the U.S. It was, it was not, it was nothing was a crisis. It was, oh, you ran a little bit late, no problem. But, it definitely more civilized, more sociable way, I think, to eat.
Sure. I think there's so many benefits to that. The time that you spend with your family, you learn conversation skills. There's so much more at the table than where your fork belongs that can happen at the table. And I always said that, children see your mannerisms, how you're making eye contact, and how it is special. It's a special time for family. And that's where, we try to talk about the importance of the family meal. And that take that time with your kids, because they're learning about your day. And that's when they learn to ask questions, and, they become more interesting because they're hearing the conversation from adults. There's so much that can be learned and taught, and so many good memories, I think, from the family meal.
Yeah. I agree. And also it's generational. So multi-generational. I mean, in the case over there, for us, it wasn't, because we were there, just our immediate family. But I mean, my daughter would be invited to a friend's for lunch, and she would go there and she would say, well, I met Sophia's grandmother or grandfather. And again, so they were interacting. And I think it's important, especially, when they're younger, to be able to interact with, older adults. That it's a much different, they enjoy seeing the kids and hearing about school. And I think the kids really, value their sort of wisdom, and, they like to, they like to be with people other than their immediate peers. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. so much to learn from those older generations, the wisdom.
Yeah.
And I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about the blue zones and how it really benefits the blue zones. They are having those big lunches, and they're inviting all, their children and the children's children, and how much everyone benefits from that. And the elderly
Yeah.
especially benefit from being around the younger
Right.
generation. And of course, we can't even begin to talk about how much a children learns from that grandparent generation or even the great grandparent generation.
Right.
All
And I
good,
think one of
all
the
good things happen at the dinner table.
Yeah, and just to touch on that, one of the things I remember specifically about COVID, they were saying that there wasn't so much this issue, I know, in Rome, even though COVID was prevalent. But I heard in the U.S. they had a lot of the older people in the nursing homes, really fell into a deep depression because of the isolation during COVID.
Yes.
And it was interesting because we didn't have that as much in Italy. There aren't nursing homes. You take care of your extended family. It's a little bit different. There's not that option. But I did find, reading an article about how the older people did fare better if they had, been around, socializing with more people than this. And it was actually pretty interesting. So I did find that to be, because a lot of the, of course, COVID, you can predict who was going to get it and who wasn't. But I have to say that I do find that the older people there were much sharper, and I think a lot of it has to do with the amount of socialization there is. They can't really
100%.
isolate living there.
100%. I could see that with my own family. I have an elderly aunt, and I won't get into all the details, but I could see firsthand the lack of socialization. And I think we've really forgot in the U.S. I think we forgot about our older generation and how they fared through COVID.
Yeah, definitely. No, definitely. So it was interesting. So I guess, that's another value, right? To the, really.
Yeah. It helps us all. That can't say enough about those Sunday lunches and Saturday lunches and breakfast. Anytime, whether, maybe with both parents working, I understand for some families, it's not, they can't be all the time. Even if it's a Saturday morning pancakes and you have to go out and you just buy something to bring it home and put it on a platter, it isn't so much about the food. It's that dedicated time. Cell phones in a completely different room. Nothing else should be on the table but food and your utensils. And the main purpose is just to have a conversation. It's so very important. Who would be on your dinner party list?
My dinner party list. Okay, so my dinner party list would be, I wrote it down so I could remember. Jane Austen, Dorothy Parker.
Oh yeah, great. I'm sorry, who is that?
Dorothy Parker.
Okay.
The Algonquin Table from the 1920s. She was a writer and a satirist and a humorist. She, Amelia Earhart. I'm not sure why, because I know how it ended with Amelia Earhart, but I still want to talk to her.
Yes, I would too.
And then the two Keith Haring, who, was an artist in the 80s, and Pete Mondrian, who's also an artist, a Dutch artist, and I think it was around the 1920s. And the only reason I put them together was I thought, they were both artists. But they both used, Pete Mondrian exclusively used primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. And so did Keith Haring. So I thought, God, they would have a nice conversation together, the two of them. That was
what an interesting dinner party.
It is. They're all sort of, Jane Austen being an author, Dorothy Parker being, an author. They're also all from different sort of eras. So I thought that would be interesting how they would interact. I had to, that was a really great question because I had to give it a lot of thought because, like I said, people pick celebrities and I picked all people who I never met, I've never spoken to, I'll never meet. But I want to get to know them.
You'd like to get to know them.
Yeah.
Yes, I would like to be on your dinner party list. I think that sounds like a
Of course.
fascinating, definitely good conversation for sure.
Right, right. So yeah, so no, that was a great question because it really you really have to think about it. I think I was asked that too several years ago. I don't know what I was doing, and I remember at the time thinking, and it's interesting the answers people give you. I think I mentioned to you
Hmm.
I had asked my last night. I said, "Oh, who would you have?" And of course, she's like said Santa, and I said, "Oh, Santa Claus, okay." But it was interesting. Her other
I've
question
never
was,
gotten that.
I know Santa. I don't know why you asked Santa, but sure. But it was interesting because she also made a comment and she said, are they people that do they have to be alive or do they have to be dead?" And I sat there and I thought I didn't even think about that whether they were alive or dead. I was just thinking who's going to be at the dinner party. So
It's
it's
going to be
sort
a
of funny.
dinner party. I know.
Yeah.
Yes, I like that you
So,
included
yeah.
both.
So,
When you mentioned you have a daughter, she's 11, and
yeah.
what were your
Yep.
favorite books to read to her as a child? Oh, she's still a child, but as when she was younger.
When she was younger, and this is I'm this goes without saying, we read every single day a book called The Teddy Bear's Picnic. And what we would do is if the weather was nice, we would take a towel and we would sit outside on the lawn and read The Teddy Bear's Picnic with her teddy bears, and we would eat Teddy Grahams
Oh,
every day, every day. So I literally cannot remember any other book I read except that because
the
that was
teddy
just the
bear.
book. She could not get enough of the teddy bear picnic, and then the Teddy Grahams, which I haven't eaten by the way in years, but
I
we
haven't
had to
eaten
eat them as we
years, but I know what they are.
they loved them, and we had to eat it as we read it, and we bring the teddy bears out and we'd sit on the towel in the grass, and yes, so that was really her favorite book that we read, like I said, the most frequently. So
Right. And
yeah.
what a great memory. And when she's 75, 80 years old, that will be one of the things that she talks about from her childhood.
That will be. And again, it goes back to your discussion we had earlier about, so being social, because we would sometimes, we would go to the park and sit with the teddy bears and I'd be reading the book to her and other kids would see us and they would come over. And sometimes the moms would come over and they would, oh, what a great idea. You're having Teddy Grahams while you're reading Teddy, and it became sort of a very social thing. So it wasn't a formal meal, but it was like it goes back to people look for ways sometimes to interact, and I think the moms look for ways to also be with other moms, just because that at some point you get tired of the kid talk and you need adult conversation. So it was I actually met a lot of mothers by doing just by through that alone. Yeah.
I bet. And I
So,
love how you created experience around, your bedtime reading or, reading to your children
yeah.
is experience. And we all like that. And that's how children learn is through experience. And that's why I always like to have an afternoon tea and teach manners at the same time. There's so many teachable moments during those types of experiences. And it's not, children at times will not even realize what they're learning, but it becomes more about the experience than the actual skills.
I do. I was going to say one of the things too I think is like really important is that they have a physical book to read versus the Kindle.
100%. Mm-hmm.
That
There's
book,
something
that teddy
about the
bear pic.
smell, all the senses.
Yes, and it's very worn out. It's like very worn out. There's stains on the pages, but that book she will have, like you said, for the rest of her life. She will have
For
that
the
book.
rest of her
She will
life.
read it and her grandchildren. And I do know now as she gets older that they're using the Kindle. They're not really buying books as often. I don't see them buying books. I can get it on Audible, for $2.99 instantly. And those are books
Yes,
that I just don't feel they have the same emotional attachment like those childhood physical books.
I agree. I agree. There's, like I said, it's all about the senses. It's the smell, the taste, although you don't really taste it, but the smell and the reading it and the holding it. And for children, they might chew on it, they might taste it. But yeah, it's definitely about the experience more so than being on a Kindle. Well, thank you so much. I so appreciate you spending time with me this morning and giving the audience a chance to get to know you. Make sure you check out the links within the article. I'm going to link your website so everyone will know how to find you. I can't wait to see and for you to share the value that you have to your community. And your community is very lucky to have you, especially the experience of you living in Europe as long as you have, and then coming back over here to the US and talking about those experiences over the family meal and at the dining room table or the lunch table, wherever you have, like you said, you would set up in a park. So it's all about spending time together. And I think your
Right.
community is very lucky. So thank you so much. Don't forget to check out Louise's links and take care.
Thank you.